Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Hops Geek News. We are a podcast that talks about comic books, movies, TV shows. We feature a beer of the week, and typically we talk about fun things like news and all that good stuff. However, today we have an excellent guest. He is a powerhouse within the comic writing community, somebody that I know when I open up a comic book written by him, it's something I'm going to love. I'm going to fall immediately in love with it. I'm going to get immersed in the story. So David Pepose is actually joining us in just a moment. However, housekeeping items, of course, Hops Geek News. That's where you're going to find us on any podcasting platform, any social media platform. And if you feel so inclined to support the show in any way, patreon.com/HopsGeekNews. Everything that you give goes right back into the show. We go to Comic-Cons. We do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. So puts into a better product. With that said, my beer this week, and actually, both of ours, because we coordinated, oh my gosh, look at us, twins, is from Trillium Brewing Company out of my beloved stomping grounds, Massachusetts. It is PM Dawn, an American stout brewed with supernatural medium roast coffee from Barrington Coffee. It is 9% alcohol by volume, and
it is fantastic.
It's wicked good. I had this in the brewery. I did, and then that's why I had to buy a couple cans. Not to mention, we do a Supernatural Fridays. However, it's been on hiatus because your boy hasn't been watching enough Supernatural lately, and so I had to get this one. And on the side of the can, it says brewed with single origin medium roast coffee beans from, oh God, as everybody knows, if you had $1 every time I can pronounce a name, you're going to be rich. So here we go. Sidama, Ethiopia, by farmers Asefa and Molageta Ducamo.
You did great.
Look,
I didn't see the Supernatural. Now I got to take another picture with my Impala.
Yeah, it says on the can, Supernatural medium roast. Silly goose.
Well, I don't know how to read.
That's true. That's true. She lives in Florida, folks. We know how Florida is.
I've lived here my whole life. I'm subject to their education system.
Kind of concerning because she has her law degree, so can't read. No wonder everybody's bankrupt and they come to you. But anyways, let's get to the man of the hour. David, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. It's been busy, which is the best thing you can ask for in this business. Just been kind of juggling a lot of different projects simultaneously. Some you may have heard of, some that have not been announced yet. And just another great day in the comic minds.
Yes.
And before we get too much into it, I know we're going to talk some Savage Avengers and some Darth Vader. So that's got to be a little extra on the mind to have to go from, one character to the next alone would be difficult, but one universe to the next. I'm sure your brain goes crazy.
Yeah, definitely. And then, between doing that and create your own work and it's a lot. It's like shifting gears in a car. And you sort of get a sense of what the pacing and vibe and tone feels like for each different project. It's like raising, a bunch of individual kids with each one has their own their own needs and their own personality, and you kind of have. There's no one size fits all approach, but I think that's kind of the fun of this business is that no two projects are really the same. And if anything, the projects that are similar, you kind of have to work extra hard to figure out what makes them different, what sets them apart. And that is it's a really fun challenge. It's one that I haven't been gotten tired of yet. And thankfully, I've been working with some really fun editors and collaborators who are letting me run a little crazy with it.
That's awesome.
That's the best part about writing comic books is like, they give you a playground to play with and you can get as crazy as possible. There's no CGI budgets that you got to be constrained of. It's like, man, I want to see how crazy I can get with this scene, or let's make, these characters do some wild things. And that's one of the joys about it.
Yeah, within reason. I always I try not to make my collaborators want to kill me, and I probably have some degree of success and some degree of failure with it. But as long as I am working with a partner who's game at it, and I've been very, very fortunate to be working with really just like nonstop hitters since the beginning of my career, and so I've been really blessed with the people that I've worked with, and I'm excited for the people that I'm working with now.
Awesome. Now, before we go too far into, what you're working on and all, the comic books and everything, what we always have to ask all of our guests is, what is your actual geek origin story? So how did you fall in love with Star Wars, Marvel, and everything in between?
It's a great question. I one of my earliest memories, I'm a third generation comics fan. My grandfather was a comics reader. My mother read comics growing up, and so I remember as a kid, my parents got me 4 Marvel comics. They got me Amazing Spider-Man 346, I believe it was. It was Spider-Man fighting Venom right before they wound up at the island together. There was an issue of Captain America where he and Jack Frost fight an ice worm. There was an issue of Silver Surfer that the Silver Surfer did not really appear in, but Drax the Destroyer fights Adam Warlock in the Soul Gem. And then an issue of Peter David Incredible Hulk where the Gray Hulk pours toxic waste on the Abomination's face. That one always creeped me out as a kid. And so I really love those books. That Spider-Man one especially, I kind of carried with me everywhere. And it wasn't until my parents got me shortly thereafter Infinity War #2. Which if you haven't read that book, you should really check out the just what the cover looks like on Google. It's a big free-for-all. You got Wolverine slashing at Captain America's shield. You've got like Daredevil fighting, I think, Mr. Fantastic and Multiple Man on the cover, and Cyclops blasting US Agent. It blew my mind as a child, and it made me realize, like, oh, all these characters that are so cool, they all know each other. They're all in the same world, in the same universe. And that is really, I think, I don't think I realized until much later that really spoke to my ethos of just like, what can you throw together on the same plate and see how it works. And so that really got me hooked for life. And of course you come in waves. There are books that that make you fall in love with the industry all over again. Death and Return of Superman, Nightfall, Kingdom Come, Spawn, Crimson, Why the Last Man, Civil War, 52. Afterlife with Archie was kind of the book that made me that maybe I wanted to try my hand at being a creator. And I think that's the great thing about this industry is that like it comes in waves. And so I anytime that I hear people kind of despairing of the industry, if they feel like, oh, what's the future look like? Or, oh, I'm not resonating with what's coming out. I always say like the wave will come back. It always does. And you just have to really kind of keep the faith. And sometimes that's like being a Mets fan, and other times it's like being a Cardinals fan. But I think you just, I love comics kind of just, through thick and thin. And I've been really fortunate and privileged to kind of make my passion my career. And I'm just really excited to be here. And I've been really grateful for the opportunities I've been given.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that before we go into Savage Avengers, though, that makes sense because there's so many amazing characters that are in that book that you suddenly see together. So it's like, oh, that right there, you brought that from your childhood.
Anything Avengers related, that's why they're probably my favorite property in comics, is because that is the ethos, is just throw the best toys into the same room and see what happens.
Now, growing up, falling in love with these characters all working together at a very young age, what was it like then seeing the MCU come to life as a grown-up?
Oh, man. Honestly, I don't know if I believe in the multiverse, but I'm glad that I'm in the universe that like superheroes became like the big
I say this all the time.
I can't imagine it. It sort of felt like faith rewarded in a lot of ways. And not even just with the MCU, which I love the MCU. And I'll circle back to the MCU in just a second, because I came to that from, I think, a very interesting place. But I even just like, the first X-Men movie coming out, the first Spider-Man movie coming out. I always say that Spider-Man movie was kind of like what I think creators from a generation ago saw the first Christopher Reeve Superman movie.
Yes.
I kind of walked out of that theater just really stunned and thinking, oh, I want to have a career in the arts over that. Just watching Spider-Man kind of, running across like buildings, watching the way that he navigates the city. It was such a visceral way of watching my favorite character of pop culture navigate the world in a way that I had never really envisioned, and it like burned itself into my brain.
It was also, not for nothing, but that movie captured perfectly like Spider-Man. Like you had it all. You Spider-Man saving the city, and then at a point it's like you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. And it's like that's what Spider-Man is right here. Like it captured everything. It was perfect.
It really, and yeah, the MCU, is great because I had just dipped my toe in the industry for the first time as the MCU was coming out. My first job in comics, I was an intern at DC during the summer of 2008, which was when Iron Man and Dark Knight came out. And it was one of those, it kind of felt like Faith Rewarded all over again, where I had sort of just dipped my toe into this business, sort of just starting to comprehend that like people made their living this way. And that's something that I grew up in Missouri, I didn't have any creative role models, so to speak. It kind of was the first inkling of giving myself permission to try to pursue a creative career, and seeing the culture kind of follow that, bend in that direction. And particularly, seeing the Nolan Batman movies, but really you saw what Iron Man did, and you saw it kind of leading into Hulk. And then it was really, I came back to New York for school during that summer when Captain America came out, and you saw that trailer for Avengers, and you realized like something just shifted in the culture.
Yeah.
That was the first time that people really,
it was 2011.
like
I remember watching
and all that stuff finally started to be, not that it wasn't accepted, but mainstream.
It was cool. Yeah.
Like it was cool now.
Yeah. And so like I remember, I live in Los Angeles now, but I spent a few years in New York, and I remember walking through Times Square and seeing Spider-Man on the Toys R Us in Times Square, like the biggest building in the biggest epicenter in the biggest city in the country, and Spider-Man's watching us. So I feel really fortunate that sort of our indie subculture kind of suddenly blew up and became mainstream, and I think that's a responsibility. I think that every creator owes it to the next generation to keep evangelizing for the medium and evangelizing for their characters, and just really never shutting up about comics and trying to bring people in, because I think that that's the great thing about this medium, is that it's a wide table that can seat a lot of people. But the best part is we can keep making that table wider. And that's something I really try to bring. That's something I always think about whenever I'm starting a new project.
Awesome.
For sure. There's always like making the table wider. There's no, everybody's like, where do I start? Where do I start? And it's just like,
because it can be overwhelming.
Well, pick up what cover jumps out to you, read it, and then you can go either direction from there, because guaranteed there is 9 different things that are going to be related to that right within that vicinity that are going to capture you. And then you're just going to branch out from there.
Yeah. And I will say to anybody who's never read because I didn't get into it, actually Spider-Man and X-Men is what got me into it. And then I wanted to know, like I had one friend that would give me backstory, and I was like, well, I want to know more. So that's when I started reading, and even reading, because I had read the first few issues of Savage Avengers like a month ago in the trade back. And then I was reading them this week. And when you open a lot of these comic books, they do catch you up real quick. Are you going to have all of the details? No, but it's almost like a previously on. So you can jump in the middle of a comic. I always say if you can start at 1, hell yeah. But there's nothing wrong jumping, in the middle of it.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading a lot of 90s X-Men, and, the lack of context going into many of these things, I mean, the Clone Saga, I grew up in the Clone Saga and Age of Apocalypse, and I love those books. And like, I didn't have any context for that. This was pre-Wikipedia. And so I always kind of challenge people when they're like, well, I don't know the context to this. I'm like, do you need to know the context for this? Or is this sort of something that you've been trained to think you need? And that's a slippery slope that I think people, that's the one thing that I wish of more people, is that they would be more willing to kind of try something sight unseen with a little bit. They don't need to know the context. They can just enjoy the thing for what it is. And if they like the thing for what it is, then you're opening them up to a whole new world where they can dive in and they can discover all these cool things.
Yes. Yeah, I love that, because you even see it with, with the Disney Plus shows. Well, I don't have time to watch Loki and Winter Soldier, and well, you can still go see the movies. You don't, you don't have to. I think it makes all of it more fun. You watch Clone Wars, now you understand Anakin better, but you don't have to enjoy it. And I think comics are no different.
Yeah,
for sure. Like, I think when you said, we're kind of trained to need to know the context, it's everything. That's kind of like the downfall of getting that prequel series for everything now, right? It's like everything is explained. We always have a prequel like, oh, this is where so-and-so came from. It's like, sometimes you just don't need it. Yeah. Just
and we call everything plot holes if we don't know.
Yes. And you don't need to have every single thing explained now.
And I understand that, with storytelling being increasingly continuity driven, that does tend to be the case, where if the plot is reliant on the continuity, I can see where like it can stop people up. And that is something that, like, as creators, I think we need to be cognizant of. But I think, it's a seesaw, and I think people could always stand to be more adventurous with their pop culture choices. And that doesn't just mean, reading, a book from the big two that you might not have thought to read, although if you do, read mine. But, just independent work, stuff from Image, Boom, IDW, Dark Horse, but also Kickstarter. There's so many amazingly talented voices that are being platformed on Kickstarter that, for whatever reason, might not be the right fit for traditional publishing, or might have been overlooked by the traditional publishing houses. And it's a challenge. I think that's something. I mean, if I had an answer for it, I'd probably be a Fortune 500 CEO and not an independent comics writer. But I think there's so much fragmentation of the pop culture landscape. There's so much content. You could spend your entire life and barely scratch the surface.
Yeah.
And I think that that provides its own challenges. But I think it's a challenge that we should be excited to answer. And we got to do that, each and every one of us on the front lines. And we got to show that through our work.
Nice. So are you ready to dive into some Savage Avengers questions?
Let's do it. Always.
All right. So I don't know how much you want to, I don't want to spoil too much because I want to encourage people to go get it. My local comic shop had the trade backs, Epic Comics, East Orlando.
Yep. Captain Comics, Boise, same. They had it all in. And even if your comic book shop doesn't, you can ask them and they will get them in for you.
Yes, my comic shop does that quite often for me. And the second trade back, if you wait for the trade backs, is coming out in May.
Right. Yeah, it's coming out, I think, in like 2 weeks.
Yes.
So I wasn't sure what to. I've never read the Savage ones. I've only read traditional Avengers.
Yeah.
So deciding what did you get to choose the characters you wanted to use in this story?
I did.
Okay.
Ooh.
So how did you come up with this list? I don't know how many of them you want to spoil, so you can be vague about it if you like.
Oh, I can totally spoil them all. It is no worry.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, for those who aren't familiar with Savage Avengers, the way that book started was Marvel had done a licensing deal with Conan the Barbarian. Marvel had historically published Conan comics. I believe it was in the 70s all the way until it was either late 90s or maybe even early 2000s, before the rights, the Conan properties gave the rights to Dark Horse Comics. Well, a few years back, Marvel regained the rights to Conan the Barbarian. And they decided, they were going to print more adventures with Conan back in the Hyborian Age, sort of the sword and sorcery books. But they also said, we've got superheroes. Let's do a Conan book where he's interacting with the heroes of the Marvel Universe. And so that was Jerry Dugan's initial run on Savage Avengers, where it was almost akin to like a Conan team-up book. It started with a core roster. It had Wolverine, Elektra, Venom, Dr. Voodoo, The Punisher, and Conan the Barbarian as sort of a sub squad for the first arc. And then it became the adventures of Conan the Barbarian kind of bopping around the Marvel Universe. And so, he's got a couple issues with Deadpool. He's got, not really a team up with Spider-Man. He's kind of on the wrong side of Spider-Man, but, an issue with Spider-Man. He sees like a Ghost Rider of the Hyborian Age, some cool stuff like that. And so they were looking to relaunch the series, and that was when Tom Brevoort, my editor, reached out to me. And this is my very first Marvel assignment. I'd been talking with Tom for a few years. but he emailed me kind of out of the blue and said, "Hey, we have a possible Marvel project. We need you to sign the form that if we're already working on something similar to something that you pitch us, you can't sue us." And so I filled that out, and I thought, oh, I'm so excited. They're gonna, maybe it's an anthology story or maybe a one shot, And so when I was told, oh, it's an ongoing series, I kind of felt my soul leave my body.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, especially for your first Marvel series, it's like what?
Yeah, and I like I said, I love the Avengers. I've come up with sort of Avengers fan casting for many, many years. When I taught myself how to write, I did it with fan scripts, and so Avengers were some of those fan scripts. And so the thing was, they said, well, we're looking to relaunch Savage Avengers. Do you have any ideas? And my thought at first was, oh, Conan, I don't have any ideas for Conan. What would I do? And then I realized I did have one idea for Conan. I had written a treatment for something that I thought would be a cool pop culture mashup of Conan versus the Terminator. And I had written a whole pitch for that I was getting ready to send to Dark Horse. And the week I finished it, Marvel announced that they had the rights to Conan. And I thought, well, I'm never going to get to write that. And I asked Tom, I said, what if we did Conan versus the Terminator using Deathlock, which is sort of Marvel's version of the Terminator. He's sort of like half cyborg, half corpse. There's a whole army of them from the future, and they were patrolling the time stream. And
see, I had only known him from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh, yeah. And so, well, it's funny because, that's how Deathlock started. It was just as like a single character, sort of a human weapon, almost in the vein of like a Wolverine. And I think it was either Rick Remender or Jason Aaron kind of added a wrinkle in the continuity, saying, oh, in the future, there's a bunch of Deathlocks, and they are sort of patrolling the multiverse. And so I thought, Conan versus the Terminator, that'd be cool. We'll throw some superheroes in the mix, like for good measure. It's a sword and sorcery Terminator, where he's being hunted by a cyborg across the Hyborian Age.
Right.
It wound up being like a really fun book. The way that we picked that roster, we had Elektra returning from the first run as Daredevil. She was doing that in Chip Zdarsky's run, and I thought it was such a cool reimagining of the character and such a fun upgrade. So I was like, please let me use her as Daredevil, and they said, oh, we're keeping that running for a while. Feel free. We had Black Knight because I thought, oh, a guy with a laser sword next to Conan, that'd be like a cool, a cool thing. And then Cloak and Dagger, who are characters I've really loved for a long time. Matt Fraction's Dark X-Men event series. It was Utopia, it was called. I love that. And I thought, oh, like Cloak and Dagger are so underrated. Like they should be Avengers. They've got the powers, and there's some cool wrinkles that I could see with them. Mm-hmm. And then kind of rounding out the squad, I said I wanted a Wolverine and I wanted a Venom, kind of to honor what Jerry Dugan had done in his initial arc for Savage Avengers, but to put my own spin on it. And I had initially pitched Daken, or I guess he goes by Fang now. Mm-hmm. I pitched him, and I pitched Carnage as sort of the Hannibal Lecter of the team. And I was told, well, the thing is that Carnage, Rom V's Carnage series hadn't been announced yet. But they were like, hey,
that's right, yeah.
He's going to have some stuff going on. And Daken is going to be in Marauders, which and I believe it was Steve Orlando's run on Marauders. So that hadn't been announced yet either. So they were like, I was like, well, I could do Flash Thompson as Anti-Venom. He'd be like a fun choice. And we kind of hashed out a few ideas of like, I need somebody with claws. Mm-hmm. And it was Tom who said, what about Weapon H? He's kind of raw material, but I think he would really fit the mandate on this. And I had an idea for the character that I was like, well, what if we kind of did like Dial H for Hulk, where you could kind of shift between the different Hulk power sets. Because I realized, I was like, the Hulk was the one Savage character that never appeared in the original Savage Avengers. Having a guy who's half Hulk, half Wolverine actually makes a lot of sense.
Well, and you played with it too. You had some great like choice of words and stuff that combined the two.
And so that really kind of became the roster of that book. And and it was fairly early on. I think I had been when I pitched the book, I said, we'll go back to the Hyborian age, and then we would love to go to the future for the second arc. And I said, I don't really know what the plans are for Conan, but if we want to write out Conan, obviously it's very easy to do so. We just leave him. And I think I turned in my second issue when I got the word from on high that plans had changed as far as the Conan license was concerned, that Conan Properties was under new ownership, and that they wanted to kind of do their own thing with Conan. So I was like, all right, that the choice was made for me. Right. So we'll write him out at the end of the first arc, no problem. And that kind of helped us shape our second arc in 2099. We went to kind of like a Deathlock apocalypse, sort of to lean into the Terminator aspect of it all. And we brought in Punisher 2099 as kind of our new lead character. Yeah, I'm really happy with how that book turned out. I when I pitched it as kind of a 10-issue arc. Mm-hmm. And I give Tom and Marvel a lot of credit that like they honored that, especially, when the word came down that like we weren't going to have Conan anymore. Like it would have been very easy for them to say, all right, we're going to turn this into like a 5-issue miniseries. Right. I really appreciate Tom and CB and everyone else at Marvel for kind of seeing the potential in that book and letting it run for the full 10 issues. And so I'm very happy with how it came together. And I couldn't have asked for a better first book in Marvel.
Nice. That's interesting to see how it all plays out with working with Marvel, what you can and cannot do with certain characters. Because you were mentioning Kickstarter before. So a lot of our guests are Kickstarter creators, and they can do whatever they want because they're their characters. Right. So that's interesting to kind of see that. Go ahead, Matt. I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, like, this run, especially in the first arc, there's a twist with Deathlock too that I didn't see coming at first. And like, as you kind of started to lay it out, and I was like, no way. And I was like reading it with my son. And
I had
my
to
son himself was like, what?
I went back and reread the page. I'm like, wait, is that what I think just happened?
Yeah, like that. It took me a minute too. I was like, this isn't how they're actually. I thought there was a twist. Like, I was like, they're not actually going to do that. But when it revealed to be that character, I was like, that is such a bold yet. I loved it so much. And even my son, because Miles is hit. Damn it, I just spoiled it.
Spoilers.
Cut that out. If you haven't read it, guys, read it.
Yeah, go read it. Miles Morales is
that was my
Deathlock. So my son's favorite superhero is Miles. And so when he was sitting there with me and we were kind of reading it together, he was just like, no, he's a robot now. And he's 7. So like he's getting into comics.
That's wonderful.
It was so much fun.
That came about when I was pitching Deathlock. I'm a big Deathlock fan, and I didn't realize when I had pitched this that Tom was one of the original editors on Deathlock when it came out. And so I think he's got a soft spot for that character as well. Mm-hmm. And I had said, well, the great thing about Deathlock is it can be anybody. And so you can add on anybody with any sort of powers, to kind of like give them like an extra edge. And we had talked a little bit. The initial choice that I had brought up was I had said, what about War Machine? What about James Rhodes? Because I always thought when he was killed in Civil War II and then brought back at the end of Brian Bendis' Iron Man run, I thought, what about the parts that didn't make it? What about the parts that kind of got tossed out for scrap? What if somebody found them and kind of turned them into
that's a clever idea too. Yeah.
But Tom rightly was kind of like, well, like that's a good idea, but like that doesn't really add anything like power wise. And can you think of somebody who might do that? And, first and foremost, it was really important for me to have an African American character as our Deathlock. Like historically, that was the Deathlock I grew up with. With Dwayne McDuffie's. I think that's an important part of the character that I would not want to change. And so I thought, what are some characters of color that like might have some interesting power sets to them? And I was like, Tom, this is kind of a crazy idea, but I promise I would treat it with like infinite respect and very carefully. But what if we did Miles, with the spider strength and the wall crawling and the invisibility and the venom blasts? Like that's a guy who could take on a whole super team.
Oh yeah.
And for our first 3 issues, yes, he does. And it wound up being I think one of the most rewarding parts of the process for me. Like I said, Spider-Man is the reason I'm here. That is the character I grew up with. He's my favorite character in pop culture. And I think the thing about Miles that's so great is he's bringing that same experience to a whole new generation of readers, and a whole generation of readers who have been historically overlooked. I think that's my favorite part of Into the Spider-Verse is, they say anyone can wear the mask, but Miles was proof of that in a way that, as much as I love Peter Parker, can't be. And so getting a chance to write Miles and add a small bit to his story is really meaningful to me. And he's just such a wonderful character. And what I wouldn't do to write more of him, I've asked. He's a really fun character to write, and really kind of was, I think, the secret ingredient that made Savage Avengers come together in a really fun and interesting way.
Yeah, no, it definitely did. Well, and it was fun when you were first introducing a lot of the characters because, most of them I know from the movies and the TV shows, Cloak and Dagger and everything. But it was nice to see them because the TV show I felt like was a little more of a younger audience.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd like to see a more grown up Cloak and Dagger, which you delivered. But Dane Whitman is a character a lot of people are not familiar with at all that we met in Eternals. So it was fun to actually, because we did a little bit of comic origin research on Dane Whitman, but I had never read him. So it was kind of fun to see, his little parts in action and because I'm looking forward to more of him on the big screen.
Dane weirdly became one of my favorites to write out of the whole roster. A little behind the curtain stuff is when I pitched this, Tom had initially advised me Conan and 5 people. That's what I would really recommend. And I said 5 people if Cloak and Dagger count as one person. But as we were talking about it, I had a fairly long list of names of people that I sort of had to whittle down. I know I had pitched Black Widow as somebody on the roster and was told she was being used elsewhere. I had Moon Knight on that roster, and Moon Knight was kind of a tough one to cut. And I told them so, and I think Tom has remembered that because he's given me more Moon Knight work since then. Dane was almost on the chopping block. And Tom kind of rightly steered me in the direction. He's like, well, you probably should have somebody who knows Avengers lore, that knows the history stuff, so you can ease that in very quickly. But also he's in this Eternals movie, and this is the best possible time to do anything with Black Knight
before he takes off.
So do that. By the time I was writing that book, especially in the second arc, I was just like, oh, Dane, I feel is my self-insert character in the book. I think he's the most like me. And anytime I had a problem in the script, anytime I hit a roadblock, it was usually Dane can fix this. Usually it was Dane or Weapon H. They became my Swiss Army team, where I was like, okay, I can get through any sort of story hiccups as long as they're in the picture.
Nice. I like seeing Elektra as Daredevil too.
Yeah, no, cool. I like that a lot. And then we also will talk about that in a second, because you mentioned getting more Moon Knight run, which I definitely want to talk about that more. But which of these characters for you did you go in? Yeah, you got to choose them all, but was there any one that you were surprised how much fun they were to actually write that you didn't think they would have been as fun going in?
It's probably a toss up between Dane, between Black Knight, and Punisher 2099. That was sort of, I really lobbied to get him in the book. The second arc shifted slightly, it pivoted a little without Conan, because at first we were planning on kind of doing just kind of a more nondescript far future, sort of a dystopia of what happens when the cult of Set gets Deathlock technology and has had millennia to perfect it. And it was sort of, it'd be Conan, in the far future, and, kind of having him, dealing with, futuristic technology. That's cool. But without Conan, we were kind of all right, we can't really use the cult of Set anymore. And So I want to be a little more specific with this far future. And I the first thing I thought of was I said, well, what if we did Punisher 2099? Punisher was one of the people that I had asked for initially in my roster, and that was when I got an inkling of what Jason Aaron was going to be doing with Frank Castle over in his Punisher series with the Hand. And so I knew Frank was. I learned pretty quickly Frank was going to be off the table, but Frank Castle the Punisher felt like a key part of Jerry Dugan's run, even though he wasn't in it for that long. I think the best issues of that run featured Frank.
Oh, for sure.
And so I was like, I'd love to have a Punisher involved. I know I had pitched Rachel Cole Alvis at one point, huge fan of her. And so I was like, this is it. This is how we get that Punisher without getting the Punisher. Where this character already exists. And we talked a lot about, like, how do we write a Punisher in this day and age? I don't think I'm talking out of school when, like, that is a character with a lot of. He's very charged politically right now.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There are a lot of people who love the character. There are a lot of bad actors who have tried to co-opt the character.
No idea what the Punisher actually stands for, but have adopted his symbol and
or sort of taken the metaphor behind the character in the least charitable way possible.
Exactly.
And I think that's because as a character, like, Frank Castle represents, he is very much a product of his time, like, it's no coincidence that, like, he came out the same year as, like, Death Wish, and has gone on to represent things like the war on drugs and Reagan Law and Order, and I think that's a character who, as the culture has shifted, there's been a lot of questions of how do you handle a character responsibly like this, that you don't write it in a way that, somebody can walk into a Walmart and walk out with a handgun and think they're the Punisher. Or walk into a school, thinking they're the Punisher. And so that was something that Tom and I talked about quite a bit, of, like, how do we do this character justice, but in a way that is responsible, but also kind of speaks to the core hook of a Punisher. And so that became, I think, really one of the through lines of that second arc is, who is this man trying to punish? Mm-hmm. And, minor spoilers, but, Jake Gallows he's really punishing himself. He sees himself as responsible for what happened to his family.
Well, I think that's what all of them do. Yeah. They don't grieve the loss. They just seek revenge forever.
Yeah. And I think there's something about those Punishers, that they've marinated in it. Mm-hmm. They've marinated in the grief and it's kind of twisted them. And can you still give them a noble destination with that? And so that really became like a big exercise in threading the needle for that storyline. And I'm really happy with how it came together. But that was that felt like a bigger high wire act than even writing Conan. Just because, that felt like something that if we didn't handle it with sensitivity, it could really blow up in our faces in a big, nasty way. And, I give Carlos Magno a ton of credit. I give Tom, our editor, a lot of credit and our other editors, Annalise Spisa and Martin Biro. Like, I think together we kind of really full court pressed it and we're able to really kind of steer the storyline in a way that I think appealed to the character, but did so in a responsible way given today's climate.
So for sure, makes a lot of sense.
So tough character to write, but wound up having a lot of fun with it.
That's awesome. And there's a lot to anybody who's listening to us. It sounds like we spoiled a lot, but there's a lot more. There's even more characters we haven't mentioned.
So much. You just pick it up.
So 10-issue run. Yeah.
Pick it up.
Support your local comic shop.
Exactly. Support your local comic book shop. Support, the writers, the artists, everybody that goes into putting this together, because it's a lot of work. As you guys are hearing through this, it's not just something people don't just sit down and bang this out in no time. It's a lot of work. No, it's a process.
This is the hardest job I've ever had. Like, thankfully, I love it. I live it. I breathe it. I sleep it. But if I wanted an easy job, I could have stayed in my office job. This is definitely the most involved I've ever been on a job. But thankfully, it's the one job that I think I could be good at. So I stick at it.
Now, the fact that you got into it, at the beginning of the, the MCU and Dark Knight and everything, have you found it more difficult to kind of write some of these characters as they've become more quote unquote popular and certain people have expectations of some of the characters? Or is it just on a case by case basis?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think for me, it's really about, it's who do I love? I think especially writing for licensed books, but even for writing your own creator-owned work, you always want to find, what do you love about these characters, about this storyline? Because life's too short to like kind of go through the motions on a book. People will know if you haven't found something to love about these characters. So, yeah, I think for me, maybe I think the only characters that have been super intimidating. Yeah, there's ones that like, I wrote a Spider-Man story with Peter Parker for Spider-Verse Unlimited. That was really intimidating. Characters that are, I think the bigger and broader they are, the more intimidating they are. I have a Hulk annual coming out next month. That was really intimidating. And that actually, me being so intimidated by that character wound up kind of influencing what kind of story I told with them. Where we're doing like a found footage story about the Hulk.
I love that idea.
The character felt so kind of big and broad and unknowable. It's like, anger makes you shut down, as does fear. And, you can't really look either of them in the eye. Just like physiologically, it's a challenge to do that. And so I thought, what if you kind of put in a middleman? You look at the Hulk through the eyes of a camera, about a documentary crew doing a documentary on the Hulk and what happens when they accidentally find him.
That's not something you've really ever seen before either, because everybody has come at it from different angles. And they've always found challenges because Hulk is one of the more tougher characters to take on. But to be like, it's a found footage. I'm in love with that idea right off the bat, because it is so clever, because he goes and he's a character that wants to be in isolation and hide. And so it brings curiosity if we're thinking in this world of these characters, where if you want to know more about this Hulk, what is this Hulk? We see him smashing stuff, but who is he? And so to go out there and find it.
What's the impact that he has in the world around him? I think, I saw it as, there are storm chasers out there. Like, what happens about a crew of Hulk chasers?
I love, and I mean, the Hulks are just as powerful and dangerous as tornadoes at the same time. So,
it's something that, he'll be so annoyed that I name drop him all the time, but it's like, I chat with him like multiple times a week. I talk with him more than I talk with like family members. But like my editor Tom, something that he's really drilled into me that I really try to get in as many stories as I can is, what's the human element of all this? It's so easy for superheroes in particular to kind of turn into this like dynastic group where it's superheroes dealing with superhero stuff, and there's no civilians in the mix. It's not even, it doesn't even feel set in the real world. And that's what Marvel in particular is about. It's the world outside your window. These are supposed to be human characters with human foibles. And I think them having to save human beings is a core part of what makes them relatable to us. And that's why, supporting characters are so important. That's why you see Spider-Man rescuing Mary Jane or rescuing Gwen, or Carly Cooper or what have you. It serves to humanize him. It serves to keep that foot in the human world while he's got the other foot in the superhuman world. And I thought for this story in particular, we have a camera crew who they're really our main characters in this book. We are sort of watching them in almost a Cloverdale kind of situation where they are caught in the middle of a Hulk rampage. And I don't think it's spoiling it too much. It says it in the solicits, but like it's Hulk versus Giganto, and these guys are caught in the middle. Not everybody makes it out of that situation in one piece. How can you? And I think that really speaks to both the Hulk's impact on the world, but also kind of it's using the camera as a mirror, as a reflection on kind of the monsters inside of all of us, whether that's, ambition or greed or just not reading the room. So I'm very excited with that story and how it's coming together. I'm working with artist Kaio Mahato on that. He did a story in Edge of Spider-Verse recently with Aranya, with Alex Segura. Yeah, really talented guy, and I'm very excited to see how this issue comes together.
That's
awesome.
And so shifting gears to another thing, you also are getting to bring another character, not quite Lauren. We're bringing
sorry. I was holding up the Darth Vader comic.
No, you will be bringing Scarlet Scarab to the comic book world for the first time. And thinking of like intimidating, was that kind of a daunting task when they came to you, or did you go to them? How did that process come about?
We reported on that news, and I didn't even know that you were the one working. That's fun. I'm excited.
So the way that came together, it was very intimidating because, like I said, I'm a huge fan of Moon Knight. My first book, Spencer and Locke, had little tinges of Moon Knight. That was sort of my that was about a police officer who has like hallucinated his own best friend. It was Calvin and Hobbes meets Sin City. That Calvin and Hobbes affect what happens when you're a hard-boiled cop and you're still doing this. What was your upbringing like that you need to do this? And I remember when that book came out, that was the first time that anybody ever said I should write something for the big two, and they said it was Moon Knight. And so I've always kind of been okay, Moon Knight, like that'd be really cool. And I love the Warren Ellis and Declan Shalvey run. Jeff Lemire and Greg Smallwood did some really cool stuff. And as you know, Moon Knight is in right now. Between the Disney Plus series and Jed McKay just absolutely killing it on his Moon Knight run. Moon Knight's having a moment right now.
Oh, yeah.
So they had the Moon Knight Black, White, and Blood series that Tom Brevoort asked me to do a story on. So I did a kind of a story that was almost like The Hangover for Moon Knight. With Leonardo Romero. He walks into a diner all beat up, and all of his alter egos are sitting in the booth, and he's got to figure out all right, who's responsible for the knife wound in my shoulder, and
typical Hangover.
Yeah, Jake Lockley's actually that's a claw from vermin. That was me. I fought him in the sewers tonight, and he's oh, what's this burn mark on my shoulder? And Stephen Grant's oh yeah, we were fighting Crossfire in the financial district. He had magnesium around, so don't worry about it. And I had told Tom when I had to cut Moon Knight, I tried to get Moon Knight in Savage Avengers multiple times. I'll tell you another little secret about that, which was the original plan for that second arc was I was going to have a whole team of futuristic Avengers teaming up with our modern day Savage Avengers. And I quickly realized that I do not have the page count to juggle 16 characters.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
I was juggling a lot with what turned into a 10-man cast. That was sort of the upper limits of what you can fit in 20 pages a month. And so Moon Knight was going to be a part of that. I was going to do a Dark Knight Returns version of Moon Knight kind of in this far future. And so I had to cut that. And I told Tom that it broke my heart to cut it because I love Moon Knight so much. And it broke my heart to cut him from the roster because I love Moon Knight so much. So I think he heard me. And so he's hey, we're doing this Moon Knight anthology. Do you want to do a story? And I was really happy with how the story turned out. And Leonardo Romero did the art on it. And it's just a next level, fantastic artist. And so I think Tom just remembered that I really like Moon Knight. And so he messaged me. It was it's going on almost a year now since we've been working on City of the Dead. It's been a minute. And he said, hey, we're we want to do a mini series with Moon Knight. He's in right now. Let's do some more stuff with him. Do you have any ideas?
And you're do I?
That's cool. Smart. Yeah. Play it cool.
I was honestly so intimidated, because he's a character who I know it's reductive to compare him to Batman, but there's a lot of Batman.
Without a doubt.
Overlap. And also just I thought it was intimidating enough to take over Savage Avengers from Jerry Dugan, to be writing concurrently a concurrent Moon Knight story with Jed, who I didn't know Jed at the time. I met him, super nice, very talented guy. But I was just oh, that is tough. And so what happened was I was like, but the cool thing about Moon Knight is that like he's the ultimate kind of unreliable narrator. Like his mental state is really kind of a defining part of the character.
Mhm.
And I was like, I would love to do a story kind of like Inception with that.
Oh.
And I thought at the time, like, what if you did something like Inception meets John Wick, where like he's kind of he has to bust into this like otherworldly realm to rescue a kidnap victim. And then I said, Tom, also like, listen, like, what if we had Scarlet Scarab in there as sort of like, as a supporting character who I won't spoil exactly the angle I had for it, but it worked really well for this particular story. And I was like, Scarlet Scarab was kind of the most unexpected part of the Moon Knight Disney Plus series for me.
Mhm.
And I think she was probably the most engaging part of that.
She was amazing.
She was probably one of the more popular ones to come out. Like,
yeah, I mean, May Calloway or Calloway, she is just so talented and
yeah, she delivered it
so
amazingly
engaging.
well.
So I was like, it's also a rare instance of like the MCU kind of feeding back to the comics, not the other way around. And so Tom was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And so we kind of workshopped some elements of that. I had one element that kind of overlapped a little with what Jed was already doing on Moon Knight. So we had to kind of tweak it a little bit. But what was funny is then, a couple of months later, like I've turned in the first 2 issues of City of the Dead at that point. And I get an email from Tom being like, hey, so we are doing 70 pages for Moon Knight 25. And Jed had a thought about introducing Layla into the book. And is there a way we can kind of dovetail you guys' efforts? And actually, it wound up working really well. I don't want to spoil anything, but I believe Moon Knight 25 comes out the week before City of the Dead #1. So they're going to kind of come out back to back.
That's awesome.
And Moon Knight 25 really helps tee up what we're doing in City of the Dead. And so we'll get a little bit of backstory on Layla and what her dynamic and relationship with Mark has been. I don't think it's spoiling it too much because they mentioned it in the solicit copy, but they're the Cowboys of Karnak, and that was sort of it was a group that Mark used to run with that involved Frenchie and Layla, and sort of what was that group like, and why haven't we seen Layla since then? And where has she been? What has she been up to? And so I'm really happy with how we've kind of dovetailed it together. And I think, if anything, Jed actually has really helped me out in a big way. But by kind of both of us coming to this independently, he teed me up really nicely. And so I am very grateful to him. And so excited with how the series is coming together. I'm working with Marcelo Ferreira, who you might know from Strange.
Yes.
He previously worked with Jed, and just a lovely guy. Just really hardworking and really talented, and very hungry, which is something that I always really value in a collaborator. I always say that like I'm going to go to the mat to make this the best thing I possibly can. And it's really nice to be working with people like Marcelo, who I think he absolutely feels the same way. We're trying to make this sort of a mind-bending action story. I think the way we wound up kind of settling on it was like Inception meets Taken.
Oh man.
Where like Mark's mental state is going to be a double-edged sword in the City of the Dead. And
Nice.
He's going to have to really kind of come to terms with some long brewing stuff.
Oh yeah.
I think I watched Man on Fire, and that was the thing.
God, I love that movie.
I really enjoy it as well, and that really got me. That really helped me figure out Mark's mental state and like who Mark is as a character. I think without spoiling too much, this is a guy who is defined by guilt, and he has turned his life around in a fairly dramatic fashion, but the guilt will always be there. And this is going to be a story about how he faces that. So
Nice.
I'm very excited to be contributing to this and to get to debut Layla as the Scarlet Scarab. Marcelo did such an amazing job with her design. You can see Davey Go did a variant cover, which has been all over the internet with that Scarlet Scarab design. But that was all Marcelo who designed it, and it looks just fantastic.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm glad Moon Knight is becoming more of a household name.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely love those stories.
I can't wait to get my hands on it. Now,
well, should we go from Black, White, and Blood to Black, White, and Red?
Yeah. I'm very excited for that to come out.
Before we get started, for anybody just listening, this is the Darth Vader run, and I'm going to let you explain what it is because you were not involved in the first issue, but you're going to be in the second issue. So, yeah, go ahead and tell us about this one.
So similar to Marvel's Black, White, and Blood anthologies, which they've done for Wolverine, Carnage, Elektra, and Moon Knight. Marvel prints the Star Wars comics, and so they're doing a Black, White, and Red anthology featuring Darth Vader. And I was so honored to be asked. Mark Panacea and Mikey Basso, my editors on that, and Danny Kasem. This was the first time that we had worked together. They reached out to me. I assume after reading Savage Avengers, they thought that I could kind of do something more action oriented. And so this is not a spoiler. I don't think I'm talking out of school. They have it in the back of issue 1, so it's in the public right now. But I'm working with Alessandro Vitti on a story with Darth Vader. You might have seen him recently on one of the issues of Sins of Sinister that just came out a few weeks back. And he's working on something else that they just announced, and I'm blanking on it. But anyway, really talented guy. He was on Red Lanterns, if you haven't read that. Really great guy. But we are doing, we're doing a Darth Vader story. Sort of, how do I not spoil this? It's one of those things when you're dealing with, when you're working on licensed properties like Conan or Star Wars, you never want to talk out of school because, you don't want the licensors to be mad at you. But
100%. Yeah. Err on the side of caution.
We're not here to get anybody in trouble either.
No.
No.
I can see the Lucasfilm sniper rifle at me.
Is it Dave Filoni? It's Kevin Feige on the Marvel. Is Dave Filoni now the one that's over here?
It might be my old internship boss, Mike Seglain. But what I can say is we drew inspiration from one of the other great sci-fi franchises in history. When you see it, you'll kind of be like, oh, that's what he's doing. He's doing this story for Darth Vader. But suffice to say, it's sort of almost like an action horror story. Alessandro is just perfectly suited for this.
Darth Vader in an
definitely
horror. That's what I asked
horror
for
nightmare elements.
Yeah. And I think we're also going to get a rare chance to see Vader on the back foot.
So how does that work? Because I know with Star Wars, with Marvel, none of it's canon to the films. Yeah. So how does that work with Star Wars? Is it okay, this is going to be canon and supplement the movies and the TVs, or is this just completely different? Just have fun with it.
That's a great question. So I can't speak to what Lucasfilm, if they plan on doing anything with my story. I mean, I treat it as I'm adding something to the canon, and they can use it or ignore it forever. I that is, in certain ways, the Star Wars continuity mythology is almost more intimidating to me than Marvel. Because Marvel, at least it is spread out over
multiverses.
Over multiverses, but also, there's probably 40 different bases at any one time. You can think there's Spider-Man, there's Venom, there's Carnage, there's the Champions, there's the Avengers, there's,
right.
There's the Punisher, there's Moon Knight, there's there's those kind of bases that then everything kind of flows out of. The Fantastic Four, whereas Star Wars, you're really kind of building off of 9 movies, and that's where everything's spinning off of, and you've got stuff going on in between those movies or leading up to those movies, but those 9 movies are the core. Oh, yeah. And it's very intimidating. So Lucasfilm was very encouraging about don't feel like you need to draw from previous continuity. You can introduce your own stuff. which was very freeing for me. And they were very helpful in kind of steering me in terms of like, okay, this is a good idea. Like, here's how we kind of make it like Star Warsy, here's kind of like the language you might want to, here's how you might want to name this like ship, for example, that sounds Star Warsy.
I like that, Star Warsy.
Or like, here's this thing you want to do. Here's how we kind of are going to like thread that needle to make sure it fits continuity wise. And also just like, they rightly are custodians of these characters. So it's making sure like, hey, does like Vader sound right? Or does, is Vader doing stuff that like we're comfortable with him doing? And I know that was sort of a conversation of just like, there were a few moments that I probably went a little too hardcore, and they're like, hey, how about you like pull that back a little bit?
I mean, he murdered a room full of children. What could be worse than that?
And sort of just like figuring out a way
I want to know?
How do we do it in a way that like, still fits like Star Wars as like, as a brand. So
just veer away during the murdering of the children. You don't show it. It's off screen.
It was a great learning experience. And, I would love to do some more Star Wars. I'd have to figure out the right story for it. And I talked with Mikey Vasso very briefly about it just a few weeks ago. And of course the character that I really wanted to do, they were like, no, that character's not really available and probably won't be available for some time. And I was like, ooh. All right, that's my 90s trash persona came out, and you clearly knew which character it was. And all right, well, you're not going to let me go for that. That's okay. But yeah, it was a really fun but intimidating experience because you're just like, oh, this is the villain, like I feel kind of like weird, like thinking like, oh, I've written like two of like the big villains of pop culture, having written Vader and Doom.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like Magneto is probably like the next one on the bucket list. But yeah, it was just a really great experience. I was in great hands, just with like, between my editors and working with the Lucasfilm group, and just Alessandro is such a wildly talented artist. And I've read that issue, and he goes toe to toe with every single person in that book. It is like, I got real lucky to work with him, and I've been a fan of his for ages. So I was really happy with how that all came together. And so I'm excited for people to read it. I think it's a month from today, actually. I think it is.
Yeah, because this one just came out this past Wednesday, the first one. So that would make sense.
The 24th, I should say, of May.
But yeah, when I saw my comic book shop was releasing it, I was like, oh, I'm going to grab that before I even knew you were involved in it. Because for me, Vader, I need more, because
Lauren's
I need more to understand. I am pretty new to Star Wars. The only reason I really got in, like, my mom set me down when I was little and made me watch the originals, and I think I didn't even get through A New Hope, and I was like, yeah, I'm good. Yeah. But then living in Orlando, they changed all of Hollywood studios to Star Wars. And we're watching like fireworks. And I said to my daughter, I'm like, we should really watch these movies. We'll probably enjoy, Hollywood studios more now. And then we started the podcast, and I was like, fine, I'll go back and I'll watch everything chronologically. And I added in Clone Wars and Rebels. And now I don't know what's happening. Now I have a $220 lightsaber on my wall. I have a freaking Rebels Pandora charm on. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, like I grew up with it. My grandmother was the one that introduced me to Star Wars. My parents were out of town, and they deposited me at her condo in Florida, and I watched how the Grinch Stole Christmas and Star Wars, and it's sort of an early memory of Alderaan exploding.
Nothing says Christmas like Alderaan exploding.
Yeah, I never really understood, like it took me a while to understand the rest of it, but I was like, oh, that thing blew up that planet. That's going to have an impact on me as like a 6-year-old. But yeah, I became like
kid movie.
I became like a big Star Wars fan when they did the re-releases in theaters.
Oh yeah.
I was 11 at the time, and so I had like a birthday party where we all saw Empire Strikes Back in the theater, and then I came home and played Shadows of the Empire on my N64.
Yes.
what was it? Was it Rogue Squadron?
Yes, they had Rogue Squadron. I have that game still in my
Whichever one was
closet
on the
with my
N64.
N64. Yes.
Yeah, went home and had Pizza Hut and played those games in my basement with all my best friends. We lived like kings back then.
I know we really didn't know how good we have it back then.
We didn't know how good we had
do
it.
Stuff like that.
But yeah, I'm very excited. I've read the first 2 issues of Vader. I have not had it. They haven't sent me issues 3 and 4. But I can say the first 2 issues I'm really excited by, and also being able to share page space with Jason Aaron. Such a talented guy.
Oh, yeah.
That seeing how his story has been unfolding, it's very cool, and he's got a very cool second installment for people. So May the 24th be with you.
Love that.
Yes. When it's May 25th is the anniversary, right? Of the first Star Wars movie?
That's right. It was, yes.
Really?
And then we're recording this the day before the Return of the Jedi is re-released in theaters for the 40th anniversary. So a lot to be excited for.
It's so crazy. But yeah, my poor mom tried. It took her 30 plus years. And now my mom loves it because now she's like, yay, you know what I'm talking about. And she tells the stormtroopers at Disney that she graduated from high school the year the movie came out.
Typical mom behavior.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Came out May 25th, 1983.
I just love Star Wars, man. I love it. There's something for everybody out there. Do you have a favorite Star Wars character?
Is this going to spoil the character you wanted to write for that you're probably not allowed to say?
Dash Rendar, man. Like,
oh, yeah.
I'm Shadows of the Empire 90s trash.
Honestly, I don't know who that is. Do I?
He was the protagonist from Shadows of the Empire, which I discovered in the N64, but then read the novel. And he's, hopefully nobody gets mad at me for saying this, but it's true. He's like the Wish.com version of Han Solo. Like they needed like a Han Solo character kind of running around during when Han was frozen. Or was it? No, wait. It was Shadows of the Empire. Hold on, I'm going to look this up. I don't remember Shadows of the Empire. Trying to remember if that was before or after Han got frozen. Yes, it was between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So that was the character that they kind of fit in to kind of do these stories in between Empire and Jedi. Without Han Solo there, they were kind of like Dash Rendar. And I just love him. And I think he's such a potentially fun character to write, in particular because I want to lean into the fact that everybody compares him to Han Solo and he hates it. That like he can be just as good of a smuggler in the galaxy without everybody constantly like comparing him to like the martyred Han Solo who was out there chilling in Carbonite and Jabba the Hutt's palace. I think beyond that, like Vader for sure. Luke, I love his arc, particularly between Empire and Jedi. As a kid, if he had to say any of like which of the original trilogy was my favorite, I'd say the original. Mm-hmm. However, the first like 20 minutes of Jedi, like as a child, I was just like entranced because I knew
all black and he's just like badass Luke all of a sudden.
Yeah.
He's not like that whiny and Tatooine anymore. Exactly. He's like, Jedi mind tricking everybody.
Yeah, he's really coming to his own.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's really gotten a lot of confidence, and I thought that was just like really cool. But there's a lot of new characters that I also really love. Kieran Gillen did some great stuff with Dr. Aphra and BT1 and 000. If I thought it was at all marketable, I would probably try to pitch a BT1 and 000 story because they are just like they're like the evil R2D2 and C3PO. Yeah. They're like if C3PO and R2D2 were like unrepentant murderers. Yes. Yeah, and I love that. But I'm sure if I pitched that, they would be like, "Thanks, lose my email." Maybe if my workload decreases, I might I'll send Mikey an email and be like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And then he'll proceed to tell me to buzz off. But yeah, really fun experience and such an honor just to be kind of contributing one small thing to Galaxy a long time ago, far, far away. And yeah, that is a book that I am so excited to sell at my con table. And I will sell that for as long as I have.
Hell yeah.
Any upcoming cons you'll be at?
Yeah, I will be at, I'll be at San Diego. I'll be
never heard of that one.
a small independent convention. It's nobody's there. I'll be at Baltimore Comic-Con. I'll be at New York Comic-Con. And then I am in the process of scheduling. I actually need to get on this, a signing in Denver. Nice. There was a retailer who backed my Kickstarter campaign for the highest tier, which gets him a store signing. So I will be coordinating that sometime to come out around when City of the Dead #1 comes out.
Heck yeah, that is rad.
That's
And
awesome.
if the people from FanX Salt Lake, because that's the closest one to me, want to get this man there, #1, so like everybody else can be introduced to his art, but also so I can come say, hey, what's up in person. Aside from the fact that I will be in LA in June, but get there. Like Comic-Cons, that's where, I brought my son by your table when I was in Seattle, and he really fell in love at comic books at that point. He was so enamored just seeing the physical copies and seeing all the people who actually created the media. And that's what it's all about, man. That's why I love
My daughter just wanted the Legos when I brought her to MegaCon this year. She's like, where's the Lego booth? But I'm still working on getting my kids to read comics.
My he's in there. He's full in. He's Avengers, all that stuff. Miles, like I said, and that's what it's all about, folks. So as we wrap up, David, we always like to ask our guests, like, hey, is there anything that you want to leave the audience with? So, is there anything that you would like to, parting words from you of wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're interested in a creative career, I think you should absolutely go for that. It's not easy, but it's very rewarding. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of failure, a lot of setbacks, a lot of rejection. And yeah, I think, that's ultimately what the comics industry is about. And creative industries in general is really, it's a game of attrition. And ultimately your creativity is going to be secondary to your tolerance for pain, your threshold for pain. And are you going to keep getting up? And I think that's something that's really, that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize. They don't really get it until they try it. But I encourage everybody to do it because it's the most fun experience I've ever had in my life.
It's awesome. It's got to be surreal too when you're writing some of your favorite characters that you grew up on.
Yeah, it's really, it's pretty wonderful. So, yeah. So, I mean, thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time. It's been awesome.
Seriously. Anytime we love just getting to chat and talking about this stuff, right? It's so much fun, especially getting to go behind the scenes and just like pick the mind and brain and see the thought processes. That's half the fun. And then just reading it and then picking up on those things that we wouldn't have otherwise. And that's why I love comic books. Everybody should go to your local comic book store. It doesn't matter what you're picking up as long as you're picking up something. There is something out there for everybody in the comic book universe.
Like craft beer.
Yeah,
there's something for everyone.
There's something for everybody.
Talk to your local beer tender. Talk to your local comic book person.
They will point you in the right direction, without a doubt. And David, thank you again for hanging out with us. Everybody, welcome to Star Wars Month. This kind of kicks off our Star Wars Month. The whole month of May, we will be talking about Star Wars. We'll be talking about like the Clone Rebellion. We're going to dive into the history of Mandalore. We might get into the Old Republic. Lauren's really if she thought she was overwhelmed and trying to figure out what it was before, well, I'm about to take Lauren on an adventure that she is.
Well, we're going to deep dive. I want to do the Quinlan Voss and Ventress, go a little bit more into that.
We're doing it all, man. We are doing it all. Star Wars Month is upon us. One more time, folks. David, thanks for hanging out with us. We will see everybody next week.
Yes. Cheers.